The corona crisis, with COVID-19 as its most direct consequence, seems to be a matter of medicine and epidemiology. Virus experts and epidemiologists help to explain what is happening to us. Indeed, the effects of the virus in the body, vectors in contamination, curing COVID-19 and developing the vaccine are important angles to adapt to the presence of the virus. However, when it comes to designing solutions, human behavior is central. The prevention of contamination, getting tested, and getting vaccinated are three core behaviors that are needed to stop the pandemic. And as we know from patient behaviors, we can't assume that people will behave in ways that are constructive to lower the pandemic. People do not automatically change their behavior when experts say they should. The challenge is to also reach these many people by understanding what the causes of their behavior are, so we can influence these causes to change their behavior. Just as knowledge on the biological laws of the body is needed to understand physical states and come up with remedies, knowledge on the psychological laws is needed to understand behavior and develop interventions that lead behavior into desired directions. In this talk, I will briefly show what type of psychological and behavioral knowledge is needed to get us out of the pandemic. Here, 5 determinant models are depicted. They all map the psychological determinants of behaviors, of all kinds of behaviors, from food consumption to stealing, to buying products, to preventing corona. In one glance, you can see at least yellow and orange squares in all models. And this is what they have in common. They handle about the very same causes of behavior, but conceptualize in different ways. But together, it becomes clear that there are 2 main underlying causes of behavior. The yellow squares refer to the reasons to engage in a specific behavior, and the orange squares refer to having control over the behavior. This simplified model shows the core determinants of behavior. The yellow factors are now split in 2, plus the orange factor. The primary reason to engage in a specific behavior is that people expect something positive to follow. The expected positive outcomes. These comprise the motivation. Without this reason, people just will not engage in the behavior. Never. And when you observe that someone engages in a behavior, we must assume that this person expects positive outcomes of it. This idea of what to expect is learned through others and through experience. These expectations are the psychological factor that underlie the power of rewards. There are many different theories and models about the positive expected outcomes or motivation. The outcomes can be physically, like relief of pain or risk, psychologically, like being proud, or socially, like praise. They can be extrinsic, related to what others want, or intrinsic, related to what oneself desires. The expected negative outcomes refer to anticipated punishments, undesired outcomes, including the needed investments such as money, time or effort. These inhibit the behavior. Expected negative outcomes also have many different forms and all motivate the avoidance of a certain behavior, not engaging in that behavior. Again, several theories and models provide structures of negative outcomes. For example, physical outcomes like pain, psychological outcomes like regret, and social outcomes like disapproval from others. The orange factor refers to the perception of control. Whether one thinks to be able to engage in a specific behavior successfully. When one feels not able to accomplish a specific behavior, the possible expected outcomes, the positive outcomes from the behavior, will not come available. and their motivating power will not be experienced. Thus, feeling control means feeling control over expected outcomes. Together, these three psychological determinants lead to the formation of an intention or goal that will lead eventually to behavior. This theory does not claim that all behaviors are rational or conscious, but all behaviors are determined by these factors. Even habitual behaviors start on the basis of these factors. But there are also external factors that influence behavior. But their possible influence always runs through these psychological core factors. For example, experience influences what people expect. Social influence indicates social outcomes. The activation of negative emotions or the relief of negative emotions also indicates outcomes. Personality refers to preferences for outcomes, etc. So all these factors can influence behavior, but always mediated by the three core factors. This is a general model applicable to all behaviors, but we can apply it to specific behaviors. For example, to washing hands. People will only wash their hands according to the recommendations when they expect positive outcomes of it. In the context of corona, the main positive outcome is prevention of contagion and illness. Hand washing may be experienced and expected to relieve the threat, which then is a powerful reward of hand washing. People may also expect negative outcomes to occur from hand washing. Soap and water must be available. It takes time and frequent washing may cause sore hands. Expected negative social reactions might also be anticipated. Lastly, people must feel in control. They must estimate that they are able to wash in such a way that the positive outcomes will occur. These external factors may also influence hand washing through the core determinants. For example, in the case a person did not wash hands consistently, but has not contracted COVID-19, the experience may be interpreted as hand washing being not necessary, having no positive outcomes. Also, when the environment does not provide soap, running water, a basin, a towel, people may experience substantial negative outcomes in the form of needed investments. They may also be uncertain about how exactly to wash hands effectively, how long, how thoroughly, how often, which may lower their estimates of control. These core determinants are all specific to the behavior, here hand washing. However, we can also recognize some general determinants within the external factors. These will again be translated into specific determinants. These general determinants must be present for specific determinants to develop. Firstly, many basic pieces of knowledge are important. For example, knowledge on what a virus is, that it can be transferred, and that it can be controlled. Related to this are personal estimations of the seriousness of COVID-19 and the susceptibility to it, for oneself and for others. This knowledge and these estimations may culminate into a general perception of threat, which may be experienced as fear. Again, these general determinants that are part of the external determinants give essential input to develop the core and specific determinants of all kinds of corona-related behaviors. When the general threat of corona is perceived as low, all kinds of corona-related behaviors, hand washing, keeping distance, getting tested and many more, will not take away a threat, meaning that they have weak or just no positive outcomes, leading to low expected positive outcomes. Indeed, the present state of the pandemic in the Netherlands shows that younger people have a low chance of contracting serious COVID-19. After months of experience, information from the media and from graphs, younger people estimate their seriousness and their susceptibility as low, leading to a low threat experience. This implies that their main source of motivation to adhere to the measures is low. The threat is low and will not be further lowered through, for example, hand washing. And this is what we observed after a year of corona crisis. And not only in youngsters. So, in all those people who no longer experience a threat, what might motivate them to still adhere to the behavioral measures? People might be made more aware of the following factual structure. Instead of framing the epidemic as the virus spreads, it would be more realistic to frame it as people spread the virus. And here we see a graph depiction of the transfer of the virus in a population, the red dots. The green dots are the people who are not contaminated. The orange are people who get ill, seriously, and one person died from COVID-19. Thus, somewhere in the process of the spread through the population, people get ill and some die. Person X now is part of the factual causal chain of contamination that led eventually to the death of another person. And that's a fact, the causal chain. One possible motivation to adhere to the measures might be that people feel responsible for or might even feel guilty when they would contaminate others. Washing hands then is not motivated by lowering a personal threat, but by a twofold motivation. It lowers the threat for others and it lowers one's possible guilt to be part of the causal chain of someone dying from COVID-19. This may be experienced as doing good for the community and may also be experienced as I'm a good person, I'm a responsible person. This positive self-evaluation may be a powerful outcome of sticking to the corona rules. In this way, one's social context may be taken into account in the weighing of factors in the decision to adhere to measures or not. For example, in the decision to not invite friends, people weigh the positive expected outcomes and the negative expected outcomes of this specific behavior. Positive outcomes may be related to relief of the threat or to social or self-evaluation. But individuals may also associate the behavior with other personally relevant positive outcomes. Negative outcomes always refer to the investments people have to make to engage in the behavior, for example, financial, in time, in efforts, or in postponing the fulfillment of their desires. These may largely differ between individuals and between behaviors. Thus, all individuals make their own idiosyncratic balance, and they do this for all behaviors. All behaviors have their own expected positive outcomes and negative outcomes with investments. These graphs show possible differences between behaviors of one specific person. While wearing a mask may be seen as rather effective in lowering the threat, but demanding too strong investments, keeping distance may be seen as more feasible and more effective. People make their own decisions on what they personally expect based on information from the media, from others, and from their own experience. These expected outcomes change over time, and therefore behavior may change over time. People learn about the effects of their behavior and adjust their expectations. Before the crisis, nobody wore a mask, and people did not have to weigh its expected positive and negative outcomes. At the start of the crisis, people used the mask initially based on expert information and the behavior of others they observed. However, over time, people learn and adjust their expectations, which can lead to more, the same, or less behavior. One additional corona-related behavior is getting tested for COVID-19. During the pandemic, the general recommendation was to get tested when one has symptoms, such as cough, a running nose, or sneezing. Getting tested is comprised of behaviors such as making an appointment, going to the test location and undergo the testing procedure. But again, people will only engage in the behavior when they expect positive outcomes of it that weigh more heavy than the negative outcomes. The positive expected outcomes of getting tested may refer to a threat from the possibility of having COVID-19. The test will take away uncertainty and make it possible to start treatment as soon as possible. However, as mentioned earlier, in people who do not experience a threat, getting tested may only contribute in their perception to one's responsibility to others. But there is something specific on getting tested. Getting tested is a detection behavior, in contrast to the prevention behaviors, such as washing hands. While prevention behaviors lead to the lowering of the risk for something negative, this detection behavior may reveal something negative, which may inhibit people to engage in it. For example, when a test is positive, people may need to be quarantined, which may be related to serious personal consequences, such as loss of income. Thus, on the one hand, many people do not expect that getting tested will relieve from a personal threat. But on the other hand, they may anticipate negative outcomes when they have a positive test. This incentive structure may motivate people to avoid getting tested. A last relevant behavior is getting vaccinated. People will only engage in this behavior when they find that the positive outcomes outweigh the negative outcomes or investments. They are informed about possible outcomes through many different channels like the mass media, social media, the neighbors, father-in-law, and their own experience with other vaccinations. Expected positive outcomes refer to people's knowledge and estimations that the vaccine will be effective in holding off COVID-19. When people experience a threat, they may expect that vaccination may relieve them from it. That's the core of the motivation to get vaccinated. But when people do not experience a threat that can be relieved, other expected positive outcomes are needed. For example, related to the social pressure or their social responsibility. The expected negative outcomes mainly refer to the possible side effects. The control can refer to being able to control one's fear for injection and undergo the procedure. To summarize, as follows from this model, the general determinants and the specific determinants cause behavior. The present factual situation shows that only a proportion of the people has been contaminated. Most of them do not get ill seriously, and especially people in risk groups will die from it. People now know that this is the situation, and as a result, many do not experience a threat or fear anymore of COVID-19, which undermines their motivation. This is a situation that has developed after a year of Corona. Now the psychological causes of behavior have been mapped. The design of interventions to influence the behaviors can be initiated. Given the low threat many people experience, they must be made aware of other good reasons to invest in the behaviors. A related principle is that we might try to lower the needed investments, so the behavior becomes more easy to do, even with low motivation. I will not go into this further here. Intervention development is a complex process in which the exact goals of an intervention are formulated and behavior change techniques and intervention techniques are designed in relation to the channel. People can be reached by different types of channels. Individual communication by professionals, such as doctors, can persuade people. Information through press conferences, websites and social media can target the public. Or the environment can be designed to remind people of the threat and the positive outcomes and to make the behavior easier. Our knowledge on human behavior makes it possible to act, to intervene, to change the population's behavior. And it's not a matter of whether we can influence behavior in desired directions, but at what costs do we want to stimulate, support, or even force people. The present state of the pandemic shows how much governments and institutions have been willing to pressure people. There are several more psychological issues that I did not deal with in this brief talk. For example, how the crisis influences people's healthy lifestyles, or how people feel in this crisis, why people adhere to conspiracy beliefs about the virus, and many other topics. I focused on the behaviors that are central and causal in the corona pandemic. Knowing the causes of these behaviors is important. Interventions must target the psychological causes of behavior. To be effective, the mapping of the causes as well as the design of interventions should be based on scientific and professional knowledge. Only with all hands on deck, from all sciences and technology, humanity will show its unique ability to adapt and survive.